welcome everyone. Here in the Atlantic Council's brand new global headquarters, we have the annual board forum. And we've been convening in off-record sessions all morning long. They've been absolutely fascinating. This is a special treat where we're bringing in our global virtual audience for an edition of Atlantic Council Front Page, which is our premier platform for global leaders. And this will be an on-record part of our annual board forum. And it is my pleasure to welcome Chevron Chairman and CEO Mike Wirth to talk about the profound shifts in the global energy landscape shaping the future of energy policy. First of all, before we get started, I wanted to recognize Chevron's longstanding partnership with the Atlantic Council, where we've been educating people on questions of the energy transition for a long time already. I really want to thank you for that. And that's reaching out to the public, reaching out to policymakers, reaching out to business, reaching out to civil society. All of you are invited to the Global Energy Forum, the Atlantic Council Annual Global Energy Forum. It's usually in Abu Dhabi. This year, in June 17th, 18th, it will be in Washington, D.C. because of the high, and we'll get to this, the high degree of interest in where the U.S. will go in terms of its own approach to energy and policy. It's run by the Global Energy Center and the Senior Director, Landon Durrance, one of our top leaders. And if you want to know anything more about it, just contact people. The Atlantic Council will get you the information. Over the past few months, we've hosted a series of Atlantic Council Front Page events entitled Elections 2024, America's Role in the World. And it featured speakers, leaders, Democrats, Republicans, speaking on key issues impacted by the outcome of the November elections. Now we're on the other side of those elections. Donald Trump returning to the White House, and we're all eager to see what impact that's going to have on a wide range of issues. Given the central role energy plays in security and prosperity, as well as the Atlantic Council's workhouse in our Global Energy Center, we're delighted to have one of the world's, and it's truly one of the world's foremost energy industry leaders and thinkers with us today. Mike Wirth, Chairman and CEO of Chevron, brings an abundance of expertise to this. Leader of one of the world's largest energy enterprises, he's navigated the complex challenge of meeting today's energy needs while investing in tomorrow's sustainability. We find ourselves at an inflection point in global energy policy. The Atlantic Council prides itself in looking at the energy transition and all the issues of the energy transition, and including the geopolitics of the energy transition. Last month, the election of President-elect Trump initiated what we can expect to be the return of a more forward-leaning energy dominance agenda, that's his own language, characterized by his first term, and perhaps a little bit away, or even a lot away, from the Biden administration's prioritization of overseeing a global response to the climate crisis. But it's interesting to ask yourselves, well, how much difference will that actually make? This parallels a growing trend around the world in which the urgency of energy security has intensified. Russia's invasion of Ukraine exposed vulnerabilities of Europe's dependence on Russian natural gas, which once supplied 40% of Europe's needs. Meeting global energy demand, thanks to economic growth, remains a feature of the energy system. And taken together, nations have found themselves compelled to expand and diversify energy sources while investing in resilience as a cornerstone. There's a lot to talk about in this conversation. Artificial intelligence is going to bring with it huge demand for energy, for data centers. Hyperscalers, we have companies that never talked to us at the Atlantic Council about energy before. Now we're talking to us about energy all the time. Same time, 140 countries committed to net zero emissions, spurring unprecedented investments in renewables, hydrogen, and carbon capture. Where does that go? Last month, these countries convened for COP29 in Baku, where reaching agreement on how to meet those targets grew difficult. This discussion is being live streamed and is on the record. If you want to participate, submit your questions to askac.org. and we'll get to those a little bit later in the program. So, Mike, I wonder if you could, give us a little bit of an overview of the world that Donald Trump, the energy world that Donald Trump will confront when he lands in the Oval Office. Imagine that you're sitting with him January 21st, 2025. What's the picture that he's facing? First, give us the context for his presidency in the energy world.
Well, before I even do that, Fred, I just want to thank you for the invitation. It's really a privilege to be here. Our company's had a long association with the Atlantic Council, including members of our board like General Jones, John Huntsman, Chuck Hagel, and so we've had a long association here, and a very proud one. So it's a privilege to be here with you and your board. I think the world that the president will face is one where energy demand is at an all-time high, and this is a year where we've seen more demand for all types of energy. Global oil demand, notwithstanding efforts on the transition, is higher than it's ever been. Global demand for gas is higher than it's ever been. Global usage of coal is at its highest level ever this year. And energy is simply indispensable to the global economy and to the quality of life that people enjoy or hope to enjoy in the future. And it is just inextricably intertwined with economies around the world and with issues like national security, economic prosperity, and obviously the environment. And so I think what he's going to find is it's an interconnected market. You just had Halima up here speaking, who's one of the world's foremost experts on these markets. And I think the challenge is to try to forge a way forward that recognizes that when you talk about energy, there are really three critical things that you always have to keep in mind. One is it underpins economic progress and prosperity. Number two, it is intertwined with national security, and I know we're going to talk about some of those issues today. And number three, the use of energy in any form, even clean energy, has an impact on the environment. And so how do we mitigate that impact? How do we ensure that economies can prosper and can have affordable and reliable energy? And how do we keep economies secure and safe? And so policy needs to recognize and balance those three trade-offs. And when we over-index on one of those, we can create vulnerabilities that are not intended, but can be very real.
So you and I talked about this before, that how politicized this whole energy conversation has been over time. And there are a lot of emotions tied up in it, as well as you said, the highest demands ever. In this balance, where do you find things are right now? It seems to me that the term energy security almost disappeared from our vocabulary until the Russian invasion, and then it came back incredibly strongly. Net zero was what everyone was talking about, still are talking about. But in this balance, where do you think that the scales are tipping?
Well, I think it depends on where you are in the world and who you're talking to. In Western Europe and the United States, the focus on climate is very, very high. In developing countries, the focus on access and affordability is the foremost consideration in many parts of the world. And so, look, it's very contextual. One of the things about the Paris Agreement that I think is very well constructed is each nation has its own nationally determined contribution. It allows countries to account for the context within which they exist. They have their own set of priorities in terms of economic development, in terms of social development, in terms of security, in terms of their own indigenous resources and where they're exposed for energy or other key inputs to their economy from a trade standpoint. And so it's easy to prescribe kind of one-size-fits-all solutions. Everybody should go with wind and solar. The reality is some of these solutions work better in some places than they do in others, and none of them serve all the different needs of a diverse economy. And so allowing countries to set out a framework that recognizes their realities in their context is very important. if you think about where most of the debate that we hear goes on in the U.S. and in Europe, I think there is a recognition that the transition is going to take longer than people would have hoped a few years ago. The transition is going to be expensive, and we can talk about why that is. And so we will make progress on it, but I think there's a bit of reality that is now coming back into the conversation about the degree of difficulty, the scale of the system, and the realities of the timelines that are involved.
We'll come back to that. The transition, longer transition, more expensive, and reality is setting, and I think that's a good way to put it. One of the realities is geopolitics, and talking to CEOs around the world, geopolitics has always been in the boardroom for energy companies, but it's now in the boardrooms of almost all companies. You've got wars in Europe and the Middle East, you've got tensions with China, you've got the artificial intelligence race that's going on. Could you give us your feeling of how this has changed the context of your work? And as you look at all these issues, how do you weigh geopolitical risk?
Well, sometimes I tell people our primary competency in our company is risk management. We manage commodity price risk, we manage security risk, geologic risk, economic risk, and geopolitical risk, among many others. I mentioned some of our current and former directors. Governor Huntsman still sits on our board. Sam Nunn was on our board for many years. We've long had seasoned statesmen and figures from the geopolitical world. Condi Rice was on our board when she was in her 30s. And
Lockheed, right?
Yeah, and so we need to always be very cognizant of the fact that because of some of the things I mentioned earlier, energy is fundamentally intertwined with geopolitics, and that can include when we see times of conflict, as you mentioned earlier today as well. And so it's a competency a company in our industry has to develop. Our people on the ground, our leaders, are part engineers, part leaders of people. They're part diplomats in terms of building relationships on the ground and understanding the realities in the places where we operate. We have to respect the host countries and the countries where we do business and their geopolitical realities. You can't just show up as an American company with an American set of priorities. We have to understand that in the countries where we operate, our industry can help create a better future for people. We can build an economy, we create jobs, we create progress, we enable economic development. And the priorities of the country are things we really have to respect. So we have to meet these host governments where they are. We have to try to align on their objectives with ours. And so we work politics every day, I would say, at almost every level of the system, in country, at the intersections of countries and multilateral organizations. And it's just, it's kind of wired into the DNA of our industry because it's been that way for so long.
So go a little deeper then on a couple of these conflicts. I mean, obviously we've gone through a massive transition regarding Russia and Europe. Did you ever expect that Europe would make the shift that it's done, and where do you think that goes from here? I know you also have a pipeline that you're operating. You may want to talk about where that goes and how that's working. And then obviously, the Trump administration is likely, you know all about the maximum pressure campaign of the first term. Iran, the situation between Iran and Israel is fraught, to say the very least. How does this play out in the global energy system, both of those issues and geopolitics in general?
Two small, simple things to address. Well, let me start with Russia, Ukraine. Europe had developed, and I think this is pretty well understood now, a very heavy dependence on Russian gas. Russia's got a lot of gas. It's very inexpensive to transport it by pipeline into Europe, and particularly countries like Germany with big industrial economies that had made a push into renewables to recognize they also need baseload power when the wind's not blowing and the sun's not shining. They need other supplies, but Germany decided they were going to shut down their nuclear plants, shut down their coal plants, and so they really left themselves very dependent on gas and on their neighbor for gas. And I think in retrospect, overly dependent on a single supplier. You go back, Churchill's got a famous quote from 1913 when he was modernizing the British Navy, and his quote that, security lies in diversity and diversity alone. The Germans forgot that lesson and became very, very heavily dependent on one supplier who was not a reliable supplier as it turned out. And so the European economies responding to that. The German economy in particular, the industrial kind of heartbeat of Germany, has been heavily impacted by this. We see companies shutting down plants, moving operations outside of Germany, and across many different energy-intensive industries. And I think the realities on this are going to play out for many, many years here still to come. So, we hope the conflict is closer to an end than a beginning, but obviously that's hard to predict, and there's people in this room that are much better qualified to comment on that than I. I think that Europe is going to have to reassess its overall approach to energy supply. They've moved pretty quickly to set up import capacity, floating regasification for liquefied natural gas. Fortunately, we've seen 2 relatively mild winters, which have been very beneficial. And so in the short term, Europe's managed to come through it with a lot of pain, but without true shortages that have left the lights off or the heat off. But I think longer term, what's the right balance? Who are the right suppliers? The U.S.'s ability to export LNG is very important. We've currently got a pause in future LNG project development under the current administration, which sounds as if we'll learn more about this here later this month. But the U.S. can be an important source of supply to our allies in Europe and beyond, and I think we'll need to be in that future to avoid creating the same kind of single point dependence that has existed. Move to the Middle East quickly. We are the largest producer of natural gas for Israel. Israel's transitioned almost entirely from a coal-fired power generation system to one that's predominantly gas now. We have 2 large platforms offshore in the Eastern Mediterranean, supply gas to Israel, also through those facilities to Jordan and to Egypt. And those facilities are ones that will be producing for many, many years. There's very large gas fields that we've got there. We've had to shut in operations multiple times over the last few months. These facilities have been targeted by rockets and missiles from Hezbollah. The naval version of the Iron Dome has proven to be effective in interdicting. We've had autonomous underwater attacks as well. And so the infrastructure has been at risk. We've got to keep our people safe, first and foremost, and secure the facilities so we don't have an environmental incident. But it's interesting. You talk to people in Israel, and they've got various ways they describe, wandering in the desert, and everybody else found oil, and we didn't. And now they actually have big energy resources that are very strategic and important to their country. And it's, I would say, they're highly aware of and keenly interested in how they use that as part of securing their future. It looks as if there's some progress being made now on ramping down some of the conflicts. I think the Iran situation remains to be seen. What still lies ahead with the current administration and the Trump administration relative to Iran, and certainly the first time the Trump administration had very strong views on what they should be doing to influence the Iranians to not develop nuclear weapons. I don't expect that to change. The sanctions that have currently been imposed upon Iran are not being enforced to the degree that they really keep the Iranian oil out of the market. It just redirects it. And that's true for a lot of the sanctions that are in place right now. They haven't really crimped supply. They've just redirected supply. And I think that'll be another issue the administration will grapple with, is do they really want to constrain supply or try to just impact it economically, which is what the current.
Well, I think that's a good transition to talk about the administration. I'm watching for questions online if people send it to ask.ac.org. Also, I hope we can rally a microphone just in case we have board members who want to ask a question. With the new administration, you know, what do you expect will change? Certainly the rhetoric is quite different. We have the experience of the first Trump administration. What are you thinking might be different both in tone and substance and actuality of policy in a new Trump administration?
Well, the tone clearly is different. This is a president who actually does understand the importance of a strong energy economy for a strong U.S. economy, and I think he's made that very clear. I think that's a good thing. I think he is a proponent of choice. I don't think we're going to see the president try to set in place policies that pick winners and losers. I think all of the above is a good way to describe it. And it's a shift from where we are today, where, for some of the reasons you alluded to earlier, there has been an effort to direct investment more into certain energy technologies and to kind of slow down investment in others. I think the Trump administration is going to try to reduce the regulatory burden that the industry faces. I hope we see efforts to reduce the permitting bureaucracy that all types of investment face in this country, and not just in our industry, but in renewables and infrastructure. It is, it's very difficult to build things in this country today, and I think we can find a way to have a good process that properly protects communities, the environment, and allows construction and infrastructure to be built. So I expect a more, you've heard the various phrases, you've used some of them here. I think it's a recognition that, look, the U.S. is an energy superpower. The U.S. is the largest, number one producer in the world of oil. It's the number one producer in the world of natural gas, the number one producer of natural gas liquids, the number one producer of renewable fuels. It's the number one producer of nuclear energy. The U.S. is the number two producer of electricity, the number two producer of renewable electricity. We have a strong, diverse energy economy, and it is fundamental to our economic competitiveness. And frankly, it's the envy of many countries around the world where I travel, and they can only wish that they had the kind of resource bounty that this country has. And I think the president's policies will leverage that for the benefit of our economy.
So I asked a Middle Eastern leader a couple of weeks ago, what difference would President Trump make in terms of the energy world? Who's official, very much involved in the energy. He says, well, about $20 a barrel. And I think his view was the supply is going to be there, that it would bring down the prices. So one question, what would be your simple answer of, maybe it's not that simple an answer, of the difference in oil supply? Will there be more supply on the market because of these policies? What's the impact on renewables? You talked about regulatory world. Impact on nuclear. I think this administration is not only going to have a lot of interest in nuclear, I think also the artificial intelligence boom may push in that direction as well. Mm-hmm. I'm just wondering what would be your response to the Middle Eastern leader who gave that flip answer?
You know, if I could predict oil prices, I probably would be trading oil instead of an engineer running an energy company. Oil prices are really hard to predict. They're a function of supply, demand. In this country, we've got, hundreds and hundreds of great companies that make independent decisions on how much to invest and produce. You've got OPEC and OPEC Plus that have, come together to try to manage supply into the market, to keep supply and demand in balance. And they have a lot of influence over global markets. And so I can't predict oil price. I sometimes tell people it'll be higher than it is today and it'll be lower than it is today. I can't tell you when or what the number is. And we don't try to predict. We plan around scenarios, but we're a price taker, not a price maker. I think on the other things, look, we're going to continue to see renewables advance. Renewables are the fastest growing segment of energy. They're coming off a small base, but there's a lot of momentum out there, and they work very well in certain applications. I think you're going to see, oil and gas production in this country is at an all-time high. Our company's producing more oil in the U.S. than we ever have. Next year, we'll produce even more. I think you'll see continued growth in conventional energy. We're investing a lot in hydrogen and carbon capture and storage and geothermal, in a whole host of other technologies that are going to come into the system over time as well. And so, look, I think we need all of these solutions, and companies that have advantages and strengths in various areas are applying those to try to develop new technologies to address future market demands. And so I think that continues under this administration.
Thank you for that. Let's talk about the hyperscalers and AI and artificial intelligence. There's a lot of hype about hyperscalers, but we have companies talking to our Global Energy Center that never had this level of interest in energy before. There's a lot of question of whether one can even keep up with the anticipated demand. And what are the sources? I mean, obviously, you're talking to these companies as well. Where do you think, what's the new terrain going to be? And where is the demand going to be satisfied? How is the demand going to be satisfied?
Well, so if you back up, and you all may have talked about this a little bit, but these models are very compute heavy, so you need these advanced chips, graphic processing units, the GPUs that NVIDIA makes. So the demand for the chips is one of the constraints right now that the hyperscalers are facing, is can we get enough of these chips fast enough? The second is they're incredibly power hungry to feed these models, to train them, and to build them up. And so there's a variety of projections you can see, but all of them point in one direction, and that's up for power demand. The third reality that I think is becoming more and more apparent is the national security implications of some of these models are beginning to be better understood, and managing the use of these models for good and understanding the security applications that we may need to be very careful about means that there's going to be an increasing desire to keep a lot of these technologies here in the U.S. as opposed to maybe locating them in places where you could get access to the power, but you might have difficulty securing the IP and the use of these models. And so you come back to the U.S. and you say, okay, what does that mean? We've got a grid that is straining to meet today's needs as we change the mix of power that goes onto the grid, and we look for ways to manage more intermittency and renewables and maintain grid reliability and deal with growing demand. Coal is phasing out in the U.S., and I don't think that is going to reverse. Coal globally is still growing. In the U.S., it's phasing out. If you talk to the hyperscalers, and I think there's some people in the room that know a lot about this, I mean, when I talk to the CEOs of the big companies, the things that matter and kind of the order of operations, the first is speed. There's a bit of a land grab underway right now to see who can get their models built faster and bigger and trained up. And so there's a real sense of urgency. The second is they need lots of power, and it needs to be highly reliable, like 5 nines reliability, 99.999% reliable. You don't want these models going on and off and up and down, and so that makes wind and solar very difficult. Cost matters, but the first two things matter more. And then the fourth is carbon intensity. And we're looking for solutions that allow a lower carbon intensity for the electricity. Nuclear and small modular nuclear can be very important in that solution set. You see Microsoft working to restart 3 Mile Island, one of the reactors there. Small modular nuclear is probably still a decade away. If you talk to the people that are doing most of the work on it, mid-2030s, I think you may see small modular nuclear become commercialized. Before then, it's very difficult. And so that's incompatible with the desire to move as fast as the hyperscalers really want to move. And you put all that together and you come back to the fact that gas-powered generation is lower emitting than coal. It's much more reliable than wind and solar. It is more socially acceptable, not 100% socially acceptable in some circles, than nuclear today. And it's highly scalable. And so I think what you're going to see is and this country is blessed with an abundance of natural gas, so much that we quit looking for it because we don't need to find more, but we get so much we can't sell it all right now. And so I think what we're likely to see is gas turbine generation is going to be a big part of the solution set. And a lot of it may be what's called behind the meter. So it would not be through the grid and through a utility, but it may be built off the grid to support data centers. And we're doing some work right now with a number of different people that's not quite ready for prime time, looking at possible solutions to build large-scale power generation that would not go into the rate base because there's a sensitivity to increasing electricity rates for the average person, just for the benefit of a few of these tech companies. And so there's a complex set of dynamics that come together there that companies like ours may be able to help address, including the lower carbon piece of that.
That's really interesting. So probably a natural gas boom over the short term taking care of this, and then longer term, perhaps SMRs.
We don't use the word boom and natural gas in the same sentence. But there could be some incremental growth in demand for natural gas, and the U.S. is well positioned to meet that. Yes.
Well, thank you for that incremental correction. I've got a couple of questions that have come in that I want to turn to, and for people who want to ask, you do have to go to askac.org. Just because of the technological way that this session has been set up. And you'll see on your desk, you'll see a way that you can do this with your scanning as well, the Ask a Question scan. So question, and some questions are coming in anonymous, that's absolutely fine. If you ever want to put your question and your name on it, that's helpful as well. Mike, I'm interested to know whether you expect the Trump administration to change Chevron's authorization for dealings in Venezuela. How might the prospect of a Trump administration's policies toward Iran, Venezuela, and Russia affect global oil flows next year?
So just to set some context for people that may not be familiar with Chevron's position in Venezuela, we are the only American company that still has operations in Venezuela in our industry. All the others left over the last couple of decades. We've been on the ground in Venezuela for most of the last 100 years. And have been part of what at one point in time was a really vibrant and essential petroleum economy in Venezuela. Obviously, for a number of years now, we've had multiple administrations that have had concerns about elections and other things in Venezuela, and have used sanctions as a tool to try to affect some change. We work closely with Treasury Department and those that apply these sanctions to ensure that they understand our presence and our role in the country. And what our view is we would like to be in Venezuela to continue working on behalf of the people in the country. And as things there evolve, we'd like to help one day rebuild that, their petroleum economy. Most people don't realize Venezuela has more oil and gas resource than any country on the planet.
I'm so glad you said that.
And that includes Saudi Arabia.
Includes Saudi Arabia, yep.
Yeah, and it's right here in our hemisphere, and the characteristics of their oil actually fit really well with the U.S. refining system. And so there's a natural synergy there that could exist. As other companies have left Venezuela, they've been replaced by and large with companies from two countries, Russia and China. And if we were to leave, that no doubt is where the operations that we're involved with would likely end up as well. And so it's a tricky situation. We've got a lot of employees in Venezuela, Venezuelan nationals. We provide jobs, medical support. We bring them to the U.S. And that's an important part of them sometimes having access to medical care and other things. So we are trying to hang in there, work with our government. Foreign policy is not our business. We want to support the foreign policy of the country. And we also want to support a better future in Venezuela. And so we've worked closely with both the Trump and the Biden administrations on this, and I'm sure we will. I don't want to speculate on where that may go because I don't know. We haven't had any of those discussions yet with with the incoming administration. More broadly speaking, Iran, Russia, Venezuela have all been the targets of sanctions. That said, as I mentioned earlier, enforcement of those sanctions has been designed to allow those barrels to continue to come into the market. And in some cases, the Russian barrels most notably, they're coming on ships that have been brought back out of retirement. They're ships that are not necessarily as safe and seaworthy as the fleet that normally is moving our products around the world. And so there's a whole series of issues that have been introduced by the sanctions that have created certain risks that the new administration will have to take a look at and determine how they want to deal with those. The overarching goal, I think, for the current administration has been to try to keep oil prices from getting away from them, as we saw during the early days of the conflict in Ukraine. And so that's why these barrels are still flowing in the market.
Thank you for that. So Dan Poneman, former Deputy Secretary of Energy, member of the Atlantic Council Board. Question is, would you see oil majors investing in nuclear energy? It has happened in the past, and micronuclear power plants now being looked at to lift and removing locations, for example, Canadian oil sands.
Yeah, Dan, so we've invested in a number of different companies that are working on small modular fission reactors. We've also invested in 3 startups working on fusion. And it's all to understand where that technology is moving and think about applications. We're good with industrial operations in highly regulated environments. And so while we're not in the nuclear business today, we certainly could consider it. We have between 4 and 5 gigawatts of gas-fired generation that we operate around the world to support our businesses in some remote locations. A way to decarbonize that would be with small modular nuclear in some of these remote locations. And so I'm a fan of the technology. I want to see it be successful. I think the world needs it. And there could be a role for companies like ours in that. You bet.
This is more of a newsy question. Chevron yesterday said it would decrease spending on CapEx in the Permian Basin in Texas. Why was that decision made, and does it speak to how you view U.S. production?
Actually, we're going to grow more production with less spending. We're becoming more capital efficient. And so it's actually, discipline that I've tried to instill in our company that every dollar we spend needs to be productive. We should always seek to make it more productive. And so the fact that our spending will come down a little bit next year doesn't mean our production will. Our production actually will grow because we become more capital efficient. And so I wouldn't connect those two if that's the basis for the question. We're going to continue to grow, not only in the Permian Basin, but the Deepwater Gulf of Mexico, where we recently started up the first ever project in a reservoir that is at 20,000 pounds per square inch of pressure in the reservoir, which is, sometimes these numbers are difficult to understand, but it's the equivalent of an elephant standing on a quarter is the amount of pressure per square inch that we face in this reservoir. So it's a highly demanding environment. That opens up a whole range of potential new development in the Deepwater Gulf of Mexico. So we're investing heavily. The U.S. gets more capital investment than any country in the world in our business.
Well, that's interesting. Let me go back to your early comment, the transition long, transition expensive, reality is set in. With that in mind, can you talk a little bit about what that means for the energy transition? How do policymakers, industry leaders now balance immediate energy needs with the push for sustainability? I guess that's the first part of the question. Second part of the question was then which technologies or strategies become most promising for the energy transition?
Yeah, so there's 3 things when I think about and talk about the energy transition that I try to start with. One is we need more solutions. And so when you're in a conversation and people rule things out, nuclear, for instance, we just talked about, sometimes I'll be talking to somebody who's very passionate about climate. I'll say, well, how do you feel about nuclear? Well, we can't have nuclear. And so, are we serious about climate, or are we just trying to say no to things? So we need to rule solutions in, not out, because we need more solutions and we need more innovation. The second thing that we then need is, once we have solutions that can work, is we need things that can scale. it's really difficult to describe to people the scale of the global energy system that keeps the lights on, the trains running, the planes flying, the Amazon trucks showing up at your home, all around the world, 24/7, 365. So things that work but are only really applicable at small scale, it's difficult to make a difference with that. And it's when we've got solutions and solutions that can scale, then we can talk about speed. And you know, there's this great desire to transition as fast as possible. And I don't talk to anybody that's against making progress and making progress fast, but you know, the laws of thermodynamics and physics and economics still apply. And it's really difficult to move fast on things that are not economic or that don't work well. And so we're making progress on this, but you know, sometimes what I try to tell people on the cost side is we've got a global energy system that enables the economy as it exists today. It's emerged over, you know, more than a century of investment, trillions and trillions of dollars of investment, and we call that System A. If System B is the zero carbon system, we've been working on that now for a few decades, and it's maybe 2 or 3% built. And we can't jump over from System A to System B at 2 or 3%. We got to build. And so we're going to build a separate energy system in parallel, and we're going to gradually cut over. That's going to be more expensive. It just is. It needs new infrastructure. It needs a whole host of new enabling investments, and that's going to take time. You know, we've been working on this for quite some time. You can go back to the 1990s, the 2000s, as this issue became very apparent. 20 years ago, the mix in the global energy system was about 84% oil, gas, and coal. Today, after more than 20 years, the mix is about 82% oil, gas, and coal, despite all the advances we've seen on wind and on solar, because the economy has grown, the population has grown, and the demand for energy has grown. And so this is going to take time. The other thing I sometimes remind people is the biggest consumers of energy are not cars. And so electric vehicles are great. Big fan of electric vehicles, and we want to see more electric vehicles out there. Most of the energy in the world is consumed by buildings, ships, trucks, it goes into airplanes. These are capital assets that have lifespans that are measured in decades, you know, 30, 40, 50 years. So the consuming stock turns over very slowly. And it won't be retired early simply to put it on a different fuel system. And so these are the realities of how the transition can unfold. In emerging economies, we can integrate things because you're not displacing an existing system if it's economic, but in the developed economies, this is going to really take us time to go through that transition.
Oh, Mike, there is so much interest. I've got a storm of questions coming, and I'll try to get through as many of them as I can. So let's do one from Brian Kelly, also a member of our board from Sempra. Can you talk about China growth and the need for global energy?
Yeah, so China's interesting. Right now, China's not growing very fast, right, Ryan? It's part of the you know, the challenge I think that we're seeing out there is their economic challenges really have slowed down growth. China, as a you know, state-directed economy, can make things happen in ways that you don't see in the West or in India, and it's been a real priority for them to lead in some of the new technologies, right? Wind and solar, EVs. They build really good quality EVs. They build them very cheaply. Sometimes they may be subsidized directly or indirectly, but they build a good quality electric vehicle. The other thing that is increasingly, I think, becoming better known to people is China has a very strong hold on some of the strategic supply chains that go into these new technologies. And so whether it's rare earths, whether it's processing of cobalt, nickel, some of the metals that are really fundamental to this, these are industrial processes that not everybody wants to have in their city or in their country. China has embraced that, and as a result, you see a lot of the mining activity go on in Africa. This has been part of Belt and Road for a couple of decades now. And a lot of the processing goes on in China, which gives China a lot of influence over supply, pricing, and they can direct things into their economy, or they can direct them into the global economy. And as we get into some of the trade tensions that may lie ahead of us, that becomes a pretty critical flow of materials if you're thinking about the transition. And what are the costs going to be? What's the supply going to be? These are non-trivial issues because we haven't diversified the supply chains for some of these inputs to new energies nearly enough at this point.
That's interesting, and they'll have the same sort of artificial intelligence demands coming online as well over time. One would